Welcome back to another episode of Rock Boys Football. My top 10 coaches in college football heading into 2024. And Dill, I guess we'd start off with there's a lot of different ways to stack head coaches. The way I went about this process was envisioning myself as an athletic director, and you told me I could hire any coach from across the country. It's kind of a process of, hey, what have you done for us lately? Right? There are a lot of good head coaches that have really strong track records. They're not necessarily going to be in my top 5 coaches because the era of college football has drastically changed, right? Transfer portal, NIL. I kind of took into account all of those things in evaluating my head coaches. Fired up to get into it. Before we do it, as always, just want to say thank you to you guys. And it has been just a blast of an offseason, taking deep dives into all of these programs. The amount of support you guys have shown the boys, it truly does mean a lot. If y'all do enjoy the content, consider subscribing to the channel. Much more importantly, let me have it in the comment section. There are so many different ways and so many different values you have in head coaches, right? Whether you really value recruiting, whether you really value player development, I'll kind of tell you right off the bat, I value recruiting at a very high level, especially in this modern era of college football. If I'm sleeping on a coach, if I have a coach too high, let me have in the comment section. We'll chop it up. That's the best part about doing these kind of episodes. And Dill, without further ado, let's get into this one. And I want to start with my guy. An honorable mention, wasn't in my top 10, but this would be a coach that I'm seriously considering if I'm an athletic director moving forward, and it's Hugh Freeze at Auburn.
I mean, it's hard to argue with what he's done, and you kind of put it out there. In terms of consistency, haven't really seen him at one spot for long enough to really say he's to put him up there with like that Kirby Smart or something like that. But again, his little short stint at Ole Miss, although it was cut short by obviously some other issues that he kind of ran into, really, really good, really can recruit wherever he is, it seems like, and does win. Where he is, he does win.
And the thing that I love about Hugh Freeze, and it's kind of from a vibe standpoint, I just think this Auburn program is going in the right direction really quickly. And I think you fast forward 24 months, I think he's got a really good shot at being a consensus top 10 coach in this country. He's embraced the transfer portal. He's getting it going on the recruiting trail. The overturn of the talent of the roster has been night and day since Brian Harsin has left this program. And I think on top of the talent evaluation and the acquisition, he is one of the better offensive-minded coaches that you see in the country. And Dill, we see a lot of offensive-minded coaches have a lot of success as head coaches going into the top 10. Let's talk about another guy that has just embraced the modern era of college football exceptionally well. That's Lane Kiffin. You look at this Ole Miss program, there have not been many years in my lifetime that you're talking about Ole Miss as being a legitimate national championship contender. Lane Kiffin has embraced the transfer portal, recruits at the high school level a lot better than people give him credit. I think a lot of the emphasis goes to what he's done in the transfer portal, which obviously he crushes. I mean, top 25 classes at the high school ranks as well. Another offensive mastermind coming in at number 10, another guy that could be a little bit higher in 12 months once Ole Miss kind of takes the field in 2024.
Well, this year is a big year for him because, I mean, if they kind of play up to their potential, this is the most talented team, the best chance he has to really do something big in the postseason. He's obviously gotten the Ole Miss team to that 9-10 win kind of consistently, and that's big. Like, you don't want to downplay that. I frankly think you're sleeping on what he's done a little bit because of the failures at Tennessee and USC. And you go back, I mean, he was really, really young for those stops. I think if you kind of only evaluate him at Ole Miss, I think you make a very easy argument that he's much higher, number 10.
And I think the last thing you want to see out of Lane Kiffin is just winning the big football games. So you go back to that Ole Miss team in 2023. A lot of people don't recognize that team was 11-2. It beat Penn State in the bowl game. Their only losses were on the road to Alabama. We're on the road to Georgia. Two teams that are arguably were two of the best teams in the country that we saw in 2024. And I think
he doesn't have that signature win. That's probably another thing that you kind of can hold against, where he hasn't gone in and beaten a Georgia or an Alabama. I mean, that's probably the one thing that, like, again,
that's what you're looking for. 100%. Number 9, and a guy that took a fall in my coaches rankings from last year, and that's Lincoln Riley. This is another head coach that certainly could move up the ranks with a successful season in 2024. You look at the track record for Lincoln Riley, It was so good at Oklahoma, right? An overall record of 74-18, 3 college football playoff appearances. Could have been 4 if Caleb Williams didn't get that hamstring injury in the Pac-12 championship game. 4 Big 12 championships, won them back-to-back-to-back. I mean, he had Oklahoma absolutely humming. One of the best coaches in college football. That being said, what was kind of that big weakness we saw with USC in 2023? Not only the defense, but the hiring. Like you got to hold him accountable for keeping Alex Grinch with this USC program in 2023. You had one of the best quarterbacks we've seen at the college football level in 2 decades. And it kind of just got wasted because he kept Alex Grinch on that defensive staff. And obviously, we all know how USC season 1 in 2023.
Yeah, I agree. I would hold that against him in a major way because even you go back to the Oklahoma days, it's like Alex Grinch wasn't performing there. So it's mystifying that he was retained, mystifying that they waste a year with Caleb Williams. No, again, at the end of the day, he's always been really, really good. It feels like he can recruit at a pretty high level. I know the USC fans are kind of clamoring for that to get rolling again, and it seems like it might be in this cycle. Did it at Oklahoma. I think the big thing I hold against him is you got to be the program builder at some point, or at least an elevator. In that, you haven't quite seen that yet.
And what I would defend Lincoln Riley, he didn't take over a very good program at USC. Was in a bad spot 24 months ago, and he won a lot of games. It was certainly on the back of Caleb Williams. You got to give Lincoln Riley a ton of credit. What he's done with quarterbacks, there's not a head coach that develops quarterbacks at a higher level. You want to, hey, I'm really high on what he did with the defensive coaching staff hires going into 2024. If that kind of fixes itself, Lincoln Riley, in my mind, is kind of back being in that top 5 coach category that we see in the country. Going to number 8, and let's talk about Brian Kelly at LSU. Another situation where I don't think people give enough credit for the dumpster fire that Brian Kelly took over at LSU. I mean, they won a national championship. That last year of Ed O was a gong show. I mean, that roster was in complete shambles. The structure of the program was absolutely out of control. And Brian Kelly comes in, tightens the ship, leads him to an SEC championship game, obviously has a Heisman Trophy winner in Jaden Daniels. He also goes out, makes some significant changes to the defensive coaching staff. You look at Brian Kelly, he is the symbol of consistency, right? He went Notre Dame, was extremely consistent, has been solid at LSU. Now it's, can you get over the hump and become a national champion? And if Brian Kelly does that, again, we're talking about top 5 coach in the country.
I mean, this is another guy I think you are criminally low on because he recruits the high school level as well as anyone. I think especially you're starting to see that at LSU. In Notre Dame, you talk about another dumpster fire before he took it over. Notre Dame was really, really in a bad spot before he took that program. That's a really hard program to, I think, have that type of success, especially in the modern day. I think he did it. He did it very consistently. And I'm thinking about some of these guys you have above him, like a Kalen DeBoer, who, again, I love Kalen DeBoer. I think he has a very bright future. But, I mean, right now, you compare him. What has he necessarily done that's in any way better than Brian Kelly?
Kalen DeBoer has gotten to a national championship.
For sure. Yeah, but Brian Kelly, you could say the same thing too, frankly, because he did go to a national championship. It was pre-playoff for sure. But Brian Kelly's gotten to those heights, and he's done it far more consistently than some of these guys I think you have above.
We're going to get into Kalen DeBoer in a little bit. Going to my number 7 player, and let's talk our number 7 coach, I should say. That's Coach Mike Norvell. I love what Mike Norvell has did. This is another one similar to Hugh Freeze that you just kind of get the sense this program's going in the right direction. It's going in the right direction really quickly. You look at Florida State in 2023, it was one of the best teams that you saw in the country. He's used the transfer portal absolutely brilliantly. Dill, I have a weakness, and my weakness has a question mark on it, and that's recruiting. I mean, I know a lot of Florida State fans said when Mike Norvell took over at Florida State, the recruiting classes out of high school weren't necessarily what Florida State can do. I don't know if he's maximizing Florida State on the recruiting trail. Now, that might be changing, but it hasn't necessarily changed just yet. And so I have Mike Norvell coming in at 7, another coach that we could potentially be talking about as one of the best coaches in the country over the next couple of years.
Yeah, I'm not fighting you on Mike Norvell. I mean, Mike Norvell, this is probably where he belongs. Again, hasn't quite gotten to those highs of highs, doesn't recruit me. or again, maybe hasn't in the past recruited yet. It does look like that's kind of turning a bit
Yes.
as the program's gotten more successful. So I really am bright on his future. Again, maybe a little low, maybe a lot. Like this is probably where I'd have him too.
Going to number 6, let's talk about Dabo Swinney. Now, if we were just evaluating these coaches in their track record, Dabo Swinney's probably number 2 behind Kirby Smart. I mean, there's not many coaches that have the track record that Dabo Swinney has. 170 and 43, 8 ACC championships, 2-time national champion. The culture at Clemson is as strong as you see in the country. The player development as strong as you see in the country. The one weakness and why, as an AD, I'm looking at Dabo Swinney and said, I don't know if I would go out and hire him is, hey, dude, the college football landscape, it's changing. You look at all the great head coaches, guy like Nick Saban. Yes, he kept a lot of things the same at Alabama, but when he recognized that he had to make changes to the program, he made those changes. Because the innovator die, Dabo Swinney just seems to not really embrace that innovation. And I'm not banging the table for Clemson to beat Ole Miss in the transfer portal. I don't think every program needs to use the transfer portal as heavily as Lane Kiffin. That being said, you look at Clemson in 2023, they were a few players away from being an ACC championship team. If they just added a guy like Keon Coleman at wide receiver or added one more offensive lineman to kind of come in and fill in that depth, but they haven't done that and not using the transfer portal like every other coach in the country, it's just handicapping this team. And when you're talking about the margins being so small to win national championships, you got to be doing everything to maximize your roster. Dabo Swinney just simply is not doing that.
Yeah, I think that's such a tough narrative around Dabo. I think there's an element where people are being a little bit short-termist in a sense, and like, okay, the past couple of years of the portal, he hasn't done well. They correlate those and bash them together and just say, well, it's because he won't use the portal. Well, the fact that he loses almost nobody to the portal, I think, is huge, and I don't think it requires him to bang it or hit it as hard as some teams. I still recruits the high school level well. I think a big thing, frankly, you need to see is him get back to developing quarterbacks. And he's obviously lost a couple of really good offensive coordinators. Doesn't feel like he's kind of gotten his footing back on that side of the football since obviously Tony Elliott and Trevor Lawrence. I think he needs to get back. That's the one thing I kind of question. Like, well, can they find that magic again? Was that some of a couple really good coordinators he had, or is that him? But somehow that's got to get fixed.
And another thing that, again, I'm not knocking Dabo Swinney's coming in at number 6, so it's not like I'm criminally low on him. Another thing that was, I guess, mildly frustrating is that didn't seem like the Garrett Riley offense in 2023. Like, you go out and make a massive splash hiring Garrett Riley as your offensive coordinator, and then you kind of don't let him run the offense. That was another thing that was probably frustrating for a lot of Clemson fans as well. Number 6 for Dabo, this guy could be a top 3 coach to some people. He could be outside the top 10 for some. I got him at number 6. Going to my top 5 coaches, and Dill, I'm going Coach Sark. And this might be a little bit low on Coach Sark. You are seeing him put it together. Did he have a rocky start to his head coaching tenures at multiple different spots? He absolutely did.
He was awesome at Washington, in fairness.
Yeah,
by USC.
And then he took over Texas. It took a couple of years. And now what I would note at Texas, I think he did it right. Like I think he laid the foundation, and then you saw the strong foundation kind of show in the 2023 season. He's one of the more brilliant offensive minds you see in the country, recruiting the high school ranks extremely well, using the transfer portal extremely well. Now you just want to see it string it together for a couple more years. And if he can, I mean, Texas has the highest ceiling in the country. I mean, they're right up there with the top programs in the country in terms of what they can be as a program. It looks like Texas is on their way to kind of reaching that ceiling with this program.
Yeah, I'm kind of with you. And I know he doesn't necessarily have the track record that certain guys have, but I mean, you're just talking what he's doing right here, right now. Really, really impressive, because I think you're right. I mean, the way he's kind of overhauled that Texas program to being a program that, I mean, they always felt like they were getting good guys in the door with Herman. It's just they weren't developing at all. Guys weren't getting better. They weren't going to the draft. Now you see, I mean, the proof's in the pudding. Like the guys he recruited that were molded by him and his staff, they're the best guys on that team. Like, yes, they use the portal for sure, but they're best players. They're homegrown guys. Like your Kelvin Bankses, your Anthony Hill Juniors, your guys who are real high impact guys. Most of them are talent molded out of Texas. And I think that's a huge kind of credit to him and how he was able to turn it around from the Tom Herman years.
Okay, so proof's in the pudding. I want you to remember what you just said when we talk about Kalen DeBoer. And I know you're going to get at me for Kalen DeBoer being at number 4. The proof's in the pudding, brother. 104-12 as a head coach, going back his whole career. You look at what he's done, not only at Washington, but at Fresno State as well. Everywhere Kalen DeBoer has been, he's been a winner. I think the one weakness that you could poke in his game is, all right, can he recruit? Over the last 6 months, we've seen Kalen DeBoer get it done on the recruiting trail, both in the transfer portal and the high school ranks. That was the big question I had with Kalen DeBoer coming to Alabama. He is one of the best pure football coaches that you see in the country. The proof's in the pudding with the career record. I think the question was, can you bang with Hugh Freeze, Kirby Smart, Mike Norvell, kind of for those Southeast guys? You've seen him do that. If he can couple what Nick Saban was able to do on the recruiting trail for all those years at Alabama and then bring over how well he develops players and runs a program, you're looking at one of the best college football coaches in the country here.
Yeah, and I think my main concern in recruiting, we'll see what he can do. I think the main thing is he really hasn't been at a program for any length of time since way back in the day.
Because he keeps getting hired up, because he keeps doing a good job.
South Dakota State, whatever school it was, Sioux
Falls.
So he is obviously there forever. He did build that thing up, and they were a juggernaut at that level.
Yep.
The only question is, like, you've seen him now be hopping around program to program for that. And you're right. That's a credit to him. I mean, he does a really good job where he ends up, where his feet are. He kills it, and he moves on. I'm still like, you kind of look at what this Washington team was. Like, okay, they had a really, really good year. They struck gold with Michael Penix. They had a couple of really great wide receivers. But I think then you kind of see them against Michigan, for example. You see them against even Texas. I mean, just the fact that Penix was able to put together a heroic effort, yes, it won the day for them for sure. But man to man, team to team, I don't think that team's better in Texas.
And so, yeah, you're giving Kalen DeBoer some massive credit. You're right. I think you're right. Washington probably didn't have the talent.
You got to see him build up a program. That's my question. You saw him catch a lot of fire and hit the transfer portal really hard for a year at Washington, had a really good year left. Same kind of model almost at Fresno State. I think your one question is you just haven't seen him be a
And I think that it's unfair to hold that against him because he just hasn't had the opportunity to do so. I mean, what are you going to turn down the Alabama coaching job? What are you going to, from when you're sitting at Fresno State, Washington offers you, you're going to keep moving up. And so you're right. You want to see Kalen DeBoer stay at a program for 5 years, sustain a winning culture. There's nothing in Kalen DeBoer's past that tells me he can't do that. He's just never had the opportunity. Top 5 coach in the country. This has changed a little bit for me in the last 6 months. When Kalen DeBoer was hired at Alabama, I was one of these skeptics. I was like, can he get it done on the recruiting trail? He's kind of shown me that he can. I think Alabama got it right with Kalen DeBoer going to my number 3 coach in the country, Ryan Day at Ohio State. And this might be another hot take, but you look at Ryan Day and what he's done at Ohio State. Yes, he hasn't won the big game. That is by far his weakness. You can't lose back-to-back years against Michigan. You got to win a national championship. This is the season for Ryan Day. I mean, I don't even know if a college football playoff appearance is enough. I think it's a national championship appearance, if not a title, is the expectation in Columbus this year. It's really hard to argue with the track record, right? He's lost 8 games as Ohio State's coach. He's won 3 Big Ten championships, 3 college football playoffs. He crushes it on the recruiting trail. He develops quarterbacks like some of the best in the country. It's just winning big games. And if he can check off that box in 2024, you're talking about the number 2 coach in the country.
Because he's had 2 years at Ohio State where he's been the best team in the country, very arguably. I mean,
yes.
When they lost to Georgia with a field goal, they won a national championship.
Yep.
And then you go back to 2019 with that kind of questionable fumble situation that they had against Clemson. I mean, they win that game. I don't know if they beat LSU. Fair enough. They probably don't beat LSU, but they're right there anyway. So you're right. They're there every year. I know people are going to hold it against him that Urban Meyer kind of had that thing built up and he just took it over. But he's kept it absolutely rolling. Again, you got to win a national championship. If he doesn't do that this year, and I think you're right. If they only make the playoffs, I don't think his job's in danger, but I think like you kind of rethink a lot of things about
I think
this.
it could be. And heck, if he loses to Michigan again, I might drop
Oh,
Ryan Day out.
and he's done.
Like, yeah, you're probably not key. This is the year. And so Ryan Day is a guy there's a big swing. There's a lot riding on this year, but I think people like to use that Urban Meyer had this thing built up. Yes, that's 100% true. Ryan Day was born on third base. It's hard to stay on third base. It's hard to continue to win at the college football level. Ryan Day has done that. My number 2 coach in the country, and this is, again, I'm reminding the people right now, this is if I'm an AD right now and you're asking me to hire a coach, it's going to be Dan Lanning. Obviously, we know who the number 1 coach is. I think Dan Lanning's absolutely cooking at Oregon. I think he's built – you look at that roster right now and say that's a national championship team. He's using the transfer portal extremely well. He's using the recruiting trail extremely well. You can tell that culture is going in the right direction. Obviously, winning big games is something that Dan Lanning needs to do going into 2024. But I just go back to if I'm in the AD chair, and heck, I might just be an idiot. I might be fired after my AD job in 5 years. If I'm hitching my wagon to a head coach that's not named Kirby Smart, it's probably going to be the guy that's learned from Kirby Smart and Nick Saban and Dan Lanning. I would love to hear not only your takes, but a lot of the college football fans' takes in the comment section on this one.
Yeah, I think this is a little bit high. I mean, at the end of the day, he had a good year last year for sure, but loses twice to Washington, doesn't really kind of get over the hump. And I just struggle to deal with, like, Dan Lanning is doing everything you want to see. I just think it's really tough to put him over guys like Brian Kelly, even Dabo. I'm very high.
You would take, if you were an AD, you would hire Brian Kelly over Dan Lanning right now?
I mean, yeah, probably. I
think
if
I'm a president of the school. I'm not hiring you.
Brian Kelly's a top 3 coach. Brian Kelly, again, takes over Notre Dame team in the dumps, brings it up, brings it back to life. I think LSU, again, they were a very good team last year. I know their defense obviously struggled. He goes out, hires Blake Baker. I love that. I think Brian Kelly's such a good college coach. Again, hasn't won a national championship. I think Notre Dame winning a title there, really, really hard. Kind of like have to do something like Jim Harbaugh did at Michigan to an extent. And Jim Harbaugh did it. Brian Kelly didn't. I still look. Brian Kelly's he's at least a top 5 coach. Maybe not top 3, but he's.
Yeah, Brian. Okay, my take on Brian Kelly, and that's not a bad point, because you look at Brian Kelly and say there's a very good shot. You have the number 1 quarterback in the country committed in Bryce Underwood. That offense, for at least from what I can see from a personnel standpoint, that's going to be a really good offense for the next 4 or 5 years. And then if Blake Baker can come in and turn around that defense, like, that's a team that if you told me to pick some teams that could win national championships over the next 4 or 5 years, Oregon's certainly one of them. LSU certainly one of them as well. And so I guess time will tell, but a little bit of a vibes play from the kid. Like,
Lanning has a certain level of energy and like something to. I do agree with that to an extent, but it's just like Brian Kelly.
Yeah, and you know I'm an energy guy. So last take on Dan Lanning, and I think there'll be people in the comment section talking about this, about recruiting, using NIL, being reliant on NIL. One, Dan Lanning was an elite recruiter at Georgia, so like, it's not a surprise to me that he's recruiting top 5 classes at Oregon. 2, being a good head coach is about raising money. And yes, it helps to have Phil Knight run and like kind of bankrolling this program. Every program has like people that can fund those programs. And I look at Dan Lanning and he's doing an awfully good job at getting money from the boosters, raising money to go out and recruit. That is part of the job at the college level. You look at Chip Kelly. Chip Kelly, in my mind, one of the better offensive minds that you see in the country. He couldn't do that. And that's what made him not a very good head coach, much better fit to be an offensive coordinator. I'm not going to hold the NIL against Dan Lanning, because he's doing a good job making it happen at Eugene. That's part of the game. Number 1, shouldn't come as a surprise. Kirby Smart, been the most dominant head coach we've seen in the last couple of years. Weakness, I don't even know if I could tell you there's a weakness. I guess maybe winning SEC championships, but you look at what Kirby Smart's doing.
Beating Nick Saban to an extent, and then he didn't hump it. There's no weakness. Kirby Smart, there's no doubt in the world that he's the best head coach by a mile in college football right now. He's kind of everybody else has to conquer at this point. That's just
all right. I left a lot of good coaches out. I left Kyle Whittingham out, my guy at Utah. The reason I left him out, if people are still listening 25 minutes in, it'll probably be a hot take there. Can Kyle Whittingham recruit at the top level to win national championships? So I'm sitting there as an AD of a massive college football program. I need a guy that can get it done from the talent acquisition department. Kyle Whittingham, a great job at Utah. I think there's a reason he's still at Utah because I think he's a really good fit. You look at Dave Dorn at NC State, I think you say very similar things. Those coaches are meant to be at those kind of schools, but if I'm running that powerhouse program, I need guys that can get it done on the recruiting trail. That was obviously very heavily weighted in terms of me ranking these coaches. Would love to hear from you guys in the comment section. Appreciate y'all rocking with the boys. Let me know what some coaches that I am sleeping on a little bit, and we'll talk to y'all later.